welcome everyone on this new episode of Let's Talk AI. Today I'm super happy to be with Simon Späti. Simon, how are you doing?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
So, amazing episode ahead. I have so many questions in this episode. So, quick reminder to everyone: Let's Talk AI. We talk about data and AI with experts, and we go deep into technical details. But we can go on many subjects. And today we have Simon. Simon is amazing at data engineering, open source data engineering. He's writing a book. He have amazing work experiences. And many more things that we're going to approach in this episode, including second minds or tools for productivity and so on. So this is a very overall vision of what's going to be in this episode. But thanks for being on the show. So maybe the first question that I would like to ask you is basically, how would you describe yourself in a few words?
I would say I'm a technical author and data engineer and educator. So that's my one-liner. If you want to go a little bit longer, then I'm also Swiss, lived in Copenhagen for 3 years and 2 months in Bali. And I'm a productivity nerd and lots of interest in Vim and websites and note taking. Yeah.
Awesome. This you said 3 months in Bali. So like, did you go like for the slow mad thing
Yeah,
and
it
then
was
you
like
came
a
back?
co-living. So it was when I was in Copenhagen, I wanted to try another experience. So there was like this Bali co-living and
Mm-hmm.
co-working,
Uh-huh.
and then I give it a try and try to build up some data engineering, data warehouse automation tools. I was there for 2 months, but the second month was basically traveling. So,
Mm.
but it was 2 nice months. Yeah.
Uh-huh. I've heard some people saying that when working from Bali, the productivity is lower.
I would say definitely you work less because you need to have this the good coffee and the good breakfast, and then you need to serve, and then you need
Yeah.
to do all of this.
Right.
But maybe you're also more. I was more creative there, I would say, because
Mm-hmm.
you're around like-minded people. You're doing different things. So and you're in a different place. Normally,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm in a different place, I'm also more creative,
Mm-hmm.
and but yeah, maybe a bit more effective, but definitely overall probably worked a little bit less or
Mm.
much less.
Makes sense. All right. Second questions. I would like to ask you about what you're doing right now. So, what are you trying to achieve? It can be professionally, it can be personally, it can be with the book, it can be anything. But what are you trying to achieve right now today?
I always have my 2 to 5 years goals, and one of that is I would like to be like a full-time author, um, writing for myself. That would be the dream, but I'm not sure if that happens. But still, I like engineering so much, so I would always like to code. I also believe the more you work with the data and the more you're still active, the more you can also write.
Right.
So I think that goes hand in hand, and also just pushing the open source journey and writing about it, and so that's my and obviously I have a family, so that's also a big goal in my
Of course.
personal life.
Hmm.
So yeah, but
Awesome. Amazing. So, third question, and this is kind of my three opening questions. But now that we know a little bit better what you're trying to achieve and a brief description, could you share maybe a retrospective of what you've been doing in the field? So we know that you're writing a book. We know that you've been doing data engineering for some time. But can you share maybe some key experiences? What you learned on those moments and like take us through your journey as growing open source
Mhm.
data engineering and all the projects that came along.
Yeah, it's actually there were many phases, and I didn't plan ahead of time. So I just
Yeah, I
started with
imagine.
an apprenticeship, which is
Hmm.
very. It's also something that is very special to Switzerland. Instead of going to high school, like in 10th grade, I guess you
Hmm.
start working,
Hmm.
and then you already have experience, right? That's also why I have already like 20 years of work experience because I already started working with 18 years old or so.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's that was the first thing, and then I worked at a big bank, so I had all the experience with the big Oracle databases, warehouses. That's where I slowly got into the data field. And then I switched to consulting for 4 years. And there, the demand for Microsoft BI was more requested. So I switched to Microsoft BI with Analysis Server, SSIS. So lots of clicking, mouse clicking, because everything is like configured with a UI. So that was where I got a little bit branded, or kind of had that feeling. That's also maybe later why I loved open source, because there you're kind of locked into
You
a
had
tool
this
that
pain.
you you felt the pain exactly. And then I switched completely. So I went abroad to Copenhagen, and I was mainly to like learn English and have a different experience, learn a different culture. And I learned all of this, but I learned more about myself than anything else. But maybe that also later. But yeah, there I worked at a subsidiary of Airbus, and there I also got into big data. Was it called at that time? So it's for example, they bought some flight radar 24 data worth of 2 years, and then everybody flew to Toulouse, and then data scientists and data engineering trying to get insights out of this data. So that was my first really touch point to Python, and how to work differently than with SQL or TSQL or PLSQL I was used to in Microsoft or Oracle. So that was quite cool. And then, yeah, that's also when I started to write. So every Friday evening, I took a big coffee. I went to the library, which is a very beautiful building in Copenhagen. And I just started writing what I learned at the job. And yeah, in retrospective, that was a key point in my life, because that's what I'm known now for, I guess. But yeah, moved back to Switzerland and did the full data engineering thing with Kubernetes and all the open source stack. And after 3 years, 3.5, I think, almost 4, I moved to Airbyte, which is the data integration tool in America. I was the only Swiss there, worked fully remote. And basically I was a full-time, I was a professional writer there, because my job was a technical author and data engineer. So I did kind of both, but most of the time was spent writing. And that was a nice experience to feel how it is to write as a professional.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, then wanted to start my book, which I kind of felt I want to do also a little bit more for myself. So going back to a data engineering job,
Mm-hmm.
and doing more data engineering, or building an open data platform now currently, and doing the writing on myself. So that's the stages I went through. It's yeah. And now, yeah, writing the book and trying to learn data engineering even more. Yeah.
Even more than what you already learned, which is impressive. Well, very very impressive background. I could have hundreds of questions just from that. Um, I'd like to ask you afterwards your experience at Airbytes. Um, it is a very, I mean, all your experiences are very impressive. The fact that you are the only Swiss person there working remotely, I think if you mentioned that, but
Mm-hmm.
that's a very impressive and awesome. Maybe I'll just go straight forward to like kind of technical question, and then I would like to ask you about the data stack, modern data stack. But
Mm-hmm.
with all your experience in open source data engineering, um, my question would be like, what are the most seen design patterns that you faced with your experiences? Or would you say that it really depends on use cases, or like there are like many use cases that tends toward specific patterns? Like, do you have some insights regarding what you've seen?
I guess two comes to mind. It's like one thing I started very early on, and also one thing I will heavily discuss in my book, is materialized views. It's kind of the first thing I used in Oracle databases, where it's basically you have a SQL, a huge SQL, and then you materialize it in a persistent storage, so you can query it like in seconds instead of waiting half an hour or 20 minutes, depending on how big the data is.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess over the years, I always see the same pattern again. It's just called differently. So if you think about dbt, which is one of the biggest tools, open source tool to like use or manage SQL,
Mm-hmm.
essentially it's the same, right? You have SQLs and then you persist them again in tables.
Mm-hmm.
It's just more managed, but at the end of the day, it's a fancy materialized view. And then now we have also semantic layers, which is kind of a layer that is more built into the BI tool, and you have like the KPIs and metrics defined. But if it's slow, or you need to cache again, so it's like I would think about this materialized view back then, because it's we just usually how it starts, you create a big query that gives you the business values or the KPIs you want, but then it's too slow, and then you need to make it faster. And the easiest way is just to like store it locally. So that's a recurring pattern, and also the initial thoughts that started my book. So and another one is also, it's also recently more in the news or in the blogs and written about, is data modeling, because before, with the modern data stack, I believe you just pick your tools and you don't model that well anymore. You kind of model tools instead of data or the flow of the data. So that was a bit, in my perception, that was a bit ignored or not taken care so much. And now I feel that people realize a bit more again, because yeah, tools are spread around. It's a bit messy, sometimes chaos, and then yeah, to avoid this, you need some kind of data architecture or modeling. So I was always the one, when I was working at consultancy firm, that that was ingrained into me. I had to like, you had like the stage, the cleanse, and the core, and the data mart. So you always had to do these 4 layers, and then you had to do the transformation in between. And before we even did anything, we always kind of thought about how is the data model, do we have a star schema, or do we have a data vault? Is that better? Why? And so all this discussion, they got a little bit pushed away, and it was more like a tool question, which is understandable. But I still believe it needs both of them. But first, it's to start with a good architecture, yeah, because tools are just tools, and if you don't have the right data architecture or model, then it doesn't work so well. So these two comes to mind.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Regarding the first one, so like you mentioned, well, if I ask you about the modern data engineer stack,
Mm-hmm.
so of course I'm going to ask you about it, but I'm still thinking about the first one, which is like views and putting everything into RAM, and the second one, like overlooking the like star models, data modeling, and so on, and focusing on tools.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about data mesh.
Mm-hmm.
So based on that, I'd ask you afterward about data mesh and how it fits in these big pictures, if it helps or not.
Mm-hmm.
But mainly, could you share about the stack of data engineers, like the modern data stack? Like, what is for you the best combination of tools or techniques?
Yeah. For me, it has like 4 key components. I'm also a fan of starting small, so I think for at least 4 you still need, although of course you can also have less, but usually you need some kind of data integration. So you need to move the data from your OLTP system, like the real or production data, into your data warehouse. I still think that's a good pattern to have, that you, or data lake or data lake house or whatever you want to call it, but at least you take it out
Mm-hmm.
of your production, so you don't crash the production. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the data integration part. And there you could use obviously Airbyte, as I work there, but there's also new tools that are a bit more lightweight. So sometimes you don't want to have a huge, I think Airbyte is very good if you have big demands, you have a lot of different connections you want to sync to your data warehouse. But let's say if you only have 2 or 3 different kinds, so you have an API or you have a a CSV import or a Parquet import, you don't necessarily need a huge open source tool, right? Because so there you could use. I think one thing I would like to look into a bit more is DLT. So not DBT, but DLT, which is quite new, and but it seems to be only a CLI, and that integrates well with the next tool is the orchestrator. And people who know me, they know that I am a big fan of Daxter. I used it from the very early days, and it's also something I wanted to build at in this Bali place, but I wasn't as smart as them. But now when I see their product, I see, okay, that's actually what I would have wanted to build if I would have known. So I'm a huge fan of this. And I also believe that this is the central piece to actually combine all the chaos or the different tools of the modern data stack. And or if I use Daxter, I see the integration is so well thought through that it's almost natural to use it as the first tool and then just integrate. So that if you have a data integration CLI and then the orchestrator, you already have quite a lot. So you don't necessarily need DBT. So DBT I would add if I have a lot of SQL and you want to keep it very easy, because Daxter can still be a bit overwhelming for like usual business people because you need to know Python, you need to know software best practices. So it's quite, the jump from SQL to Daxter is still high, I would say. Of course, you can build like a YAML framework or whatever around, so but then they don't get necessarily all the benefits. So most cases, probably you would add DBT, and then you need a BI tool. So like Superset or Real Developer is also a nice one that I like a lot, because I'm a fan of declarative way of working, meaning you have like YAMLs, or you have some kind, the KPIs, you write them locally and then you ingest them, or you have them as code. So that's basically instead of having them somewhere hidden in your BI tool, and you have them somewhere in a file, and then you can like do all the nice software engineering, like you can version it, you can like automate it, you can like sync it in other BI tools. So you have all these benefits, and that's also something I would look for. Daxter has that also as well. Then you can deploy it on Kubernetes, which also have this code first approach. And I think these 4 tools I would start with, but you can always cut even more, or then add the data catalog. You can add semantic layers. Also, Cube is a cool semantic layer that it's really great. So if you only need, if you have a lot of metrics and you need to fetch data with, let's say, an API, with GraphQL, with SQL, with ODBC, all these different, instead of building that all over yourself, you can just deploy Cube. It has all the inferences or the connections, and you can focus on your KPIs, and it then abstract away your data lakehouse or whatever you have behind. You could have at Rode Schwarz we had like a Druid, that's an OLAP open source cube, but we also had a database. But the user didn't know that, right? If he queries with the GraphQL, he doesn't know, or doesn't. He also don't need to know what is behind, right? So that's a nice way of abstraction. But you see, if you add then more and more and more, it gets also more tougher to maintain. And if you have an error in one tool, you have an error on top of an abstraction of an abstraction. So there you always need to be or balance both sides. But I believe if you start small and one by one, then you kind of have it under control. And as we said before, like modeling as a first principle, then I think it can only get well.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely I'll isolate this passage, and I will definitely listen to it again. Just like, and then like with your book and this passage, I'll just preview the modern stack, the tool, like how they're good. Yes.
If I tell too much or too detailed, just cut me off or tell me.
No, it's perfect. I love it. I love it. So awesome. And All right, I'm going to do a quick question that I know it's not about the tools and so on, but if you're like building an infra, like if you're building something from scratch and you have all the decision making, I know that the use cases will impact a lot. But in terms of infra, would you go with which cloud provider would you go if you had to build everything from scratch for like any usage? But like, do you have one favorite that you've been using a lot or more used to, and so, or like, do you think you can build
No,
on anything?
usually what I used is Kubernetes, and then you're cloud agnostic, so you can basically deploy it on each clouds. So I don't have. We used BigQuery or Google BigQuery on Airbyte, which I think is maybe one of the easiest data warehouse. So it just scales, so you don't need to think a lot about, or like creating an index and like
Mm-hmm.
optimize and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, but usually it's also a given. So when I work here in Switzerland, usually it's Azure, so I cannot really choose anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And Azure has also a lot of great tools. So I actually don't have favorites. I still try to use open source and then deploy it as with Kubernetes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't mind the cloud provider because it can be anywhere at the end.
Hmm.
But for as a personal project, um, I think I liked BigQuery or Google for. But yeah, also Snowflake is easy to start when you need a quick
Mm-hmm.
data warehouse. But usually I don't mind so much because they do all the same. It's more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And have you like what is your perspective on delta tables, like the delta framework in general, and comparing the delta that is open source to delta in Databricks? I mean, they released, if I'm not mistaken, the delta frameworks, but they have an unreleased code that is like their delta tables. um,
Mhm.
Maybe fact check that, but I need to fact check. But like, do you have a point of view like on
Mhm.
how it implements and how it compares to other
Uh,
frameworks?
I use Delta Lake heavily, so didn't use Hootie and Iceberg. But in my understanding, they do the same or similar things, and
Mhm.
also they get like uniformed. So I think Hootie just announced something that can convert from each to the other. So um, I really like them because it's basically when you work with the S3 or with unstructured data, it's adding database feature on top of your Parquet file, right? Because essentially what it is, it's just a folder that has a transaction log, but the data itself is still Parquet, so it's an
Mhm.
open format.
Mhm.
And but you can do things like time travel. You can go back and forward in versions. You can the absolutely best thing you can do SQL, so you can do
Mhm.
the update or even a merge function on top of your distributed files. So
Mhm.
you don't know where your files is, how many. So it's really dealing well with files. So whenever I would use a data lake or a lake house, I would choose one of the formats and
Mhm.
go for it. I also used Delta Lake for that reason because
Mhm.
otherwise it's you just do it yourself, right? You need to like load the files and then kind of make the update yourself. So it's really and there's also ASIC compliance, so it either fails or succeeds, but you don't have this uh, what is that states that are not complete or kind of when someone queries only half of the data, so you
Mhm.
don't need to care about that. And I believe when you build a lakehouse or any data platform these days, you need to use a tool like this. And I like it specifically because that's the data, right? It's your data from your company.
Mhm.
And that one shouldn't be like propriety. Sorry, I
Mhm.
cannot. But this it should be like an open format, and so you can also share it with other companies.
Mhm.
And I believe also that's why they are trying to push this so hard because the next step now that we have is it's hard to share data, but when you have an open format, it's getting easier and easier to share.
Mhm.
Instead of always moving the data around, we can just
Mhm.
share a link maybe because it's standardized.
Mhm.
And
Hmm.
yeah, it has so many. But I think the difference between Databricks Delta and the open source is not that big because when I started, of course, Databricks always has some features they don't is not open source yet, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's more like they're testing it, right? And then as soon as they're kind of battle tested, I see it as a good thing, because then they get out and you can use it. So
Mhm.
it's yeah, and it's for free, right? So you cannot say,
Yeah.
okay, it's not all
Yeah.
the features are there, but you also don't need to pay. So it's kind of a win-win in my opinion.
Uh-huh,
But
uh-huh.
yeah, I hope that it gets more consolidated, so you don't have to be. Nowadays, it's kind of which format do you choose, right? Is a bit a question, but in my point of view, it's also less. It's also kind of a given. If you use Azure, they use Delta as well. If you use Snowflake, of course, they use Iceberg and so
Mhm,
on, right? So it's
mhm.
mostly given.
Makes sense. I'd like to ask you about. So I'll ask you afterward about like how do you see this evolving, and I will ask you about LLMs and what roles do they play, like vector based, vector stores, and like there is a reality where you just have your data lake, you have your lake house or data warehouse behind, and we'll be soon at a point where you just query with sentences everything, and
Mm-hmm.
and it aligns with the agent. So I'll definitely ask you about that. But I'm curious about partitioning or like table optimizations or storage optimizations. Like, do you have best practices or first principles that you use towards optimizing performance on lakehouse, data warehouse? Like, how do you go about, all right, this is going slow. Where do I start to like start making optimizations and so on? Maybe this is a
Mm-hmm.
too big of a question, but but
No,
like, do you have some insights, some tips?
I think for the like the data lake part or the delta lake part, it's quite obvious, because there I would suggest to like partition by date anyway. So it is just except if you have very small data, then you can also do it by months or weeks or so.
Right. When we're saying
Mhm.
low data, are we talking about less than 1 terabyte, or
Uh, yeah, that's always a hard hard question. How much? But yeah, it depends on the data, right? You can have many columns, and then it's much more. So, but I think if
yeah.
you have data every like often a day, but yeah, for sure, I would say probably Terra above. Yeah, I guess.
Mm.
But
The
my
tera
default
is
is
like 5
to
columns.
partition anyway, right, for a daily, because it's even if you have only a couple of like if you have a lot of data but only a couple of days or so, it's still much faster if you partition by day, and doesn't cost you that much.
Hmm.
So
And
that
sorry, I was wondering, and this is like me basically, like I'm not sure, so I'm asking you from a not knowing point of view, so that maybe you can share with me. But
Mhm.
if I have like some gigabytes, like I don't know, 50 gigabytes of a table, and I decide to partition by days, but the users or maybe business people who are going to use it are going to like see more like they are going to do both big big piece of times views and daily views, and like they're going to have these kinds of filters maybe in
Mhm.
DAX or anything. So would you still partition it by day, or would you take a different approach, or partitioning at this level won't really impact that much the queries then
Mhm.
when users are using it?
I think you have different options. uh, you could It's also how you query, right? You can use Spark, and then it's also much faster because it's like distributed, so you can
Mm-hmm,
optimize there. But it also depends of use cases, because I worked in BI for all my life, and
mm-hmm,
I always had the business user that wanted like seconds or even sub-seconds, and you just don't get that from a data lake. So it's also the data lake, in my opinion, has the advantage that you can just put in all data. You as a data scientist, you can like see all the data, you can like work with them. It's not super fast, but it's okay. And I think also for like a orchestrator or like batch jobs, it's perfect. But
mm-hmm.
if you really have like business critical, like or a dashboard that someone like wants to drill down and filter by all kind of dimensions, then I'm usually, or that's also what I build all my life, is like then I add a cube on top of it, which is
Mm-hmm.
perfectly made for it, right? That stores then the data again in memory,
Mm-hmm.
and then it optimizes, for querying. So that's these two things. I think data lake is a good thing to start, but yeah, depending on what you want. I know you can optimize also data lakes a lot. You also can use Databricks. They have this Photon engine called, and I think there I haven't used that, but that's super fast SQL that directly reads it from
Mm-hmm.
data lake or their delta format. And
Mm-hmm.
I think if that works out, then that's the best. Or you don't need this extra layer
Mm-hmm.
and to build a cube and everything, which is in some terms quite hard. But I don't believe in that because it's just technically it's very hard. But if that works, there's also now a new option is the DuckDB. It's a big hype, but it's really fast. If you can use it as as an interface SQL
Mm-hmm.
layer, and then you can just read your data lake, and it probably won't scale until terabytes, but for gigabytes of data, I saw demos that are sub-seconds. Yeah, so it's just your data lake files, and then you use DuckDB, which is a very small library, and then
Mm-hmm.
it's super fast. So that's would be a quick win. But yeah, at some point you also need to scale. Then probably you need their mother doc. I think they are scaling DuckDB,
Mm-hmm.
or you need like a classical OLAP. That's also why the OLAP cubes they never die, right? Because you always need subsequence, or you have dashboards that just need to be instant,
Mm-hmm.
and that you won't get from a data lake, in my opinion.
Mm. I have so many questions. This is fascinating. This is like this is like all my problems on a daily basis for my young experience. Like could be solved in one question here. That's awesome. Uh,
Solving is harder, yeah, but
solving, yeah, solving is my problem. But like understanding better directions.
Mhm,
I've seen what you mentioned about Databricks, and I've read that it is I think it's Photon, like you said, and I think it's
mhm,
not that much expensive to like add it or take this service instead of something else.
mhm.
Very interesting. I'll definitely read more about it. Coming back to the modern data engineer stack. So where do you think that we're going? Like, what direction are we taking? Do you believe that there are new concepts that are going to emerge with like new technology, maybe LLMs, or like do you think those are like the fundamentals, the principles, but like yeah, basically where do you think the future modern stack like will look
Yeah,
like?
I think sometimes has a bit of bad reputation because it's so scattered. Or if you see this open data stacks, there's like thousands of tools, right? So it's a bit overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
or very overwhelming. But I believe there needs to be some consolidation, so there will be less tools, and just the strongest will win. And but still, you have many domains, and in my opinion, we just need a tool that integrates with most of the tools. You will never be able to integrate in all, but that's where I really see the orchestrator as the key piece that can, because it already starts and schedule and manages everything. So it's the best place to integrate everything, right? So that's where I see the future. And then I don't necessarily think there is new terms on or new things, because besides the AI, I think, but I believe the modern data stack is the best uh, storage for uh, AI, right? Because you still
Mm-hmm.
need clean data, updated data, and so
Mm-hmm.
on. So in that terms, I see it's still needed. And I one thing I might add is also the with the I don't know if that is just my perception, but Rust is also like a new modern language, and I believe there's also lots of things in the data engineering space that you can optimize. Or if you really need a fast performant uh, thing, you can just write it in Rust and then add it, write like a Python wrapper around, and then you can really solve a lot of problems just by yourself instead of using a heavy tool. So that might also be maybe a newer approach, that instead
Mm-hmm.
of using an open source tool that might be too heavy, you
Mm-hmm.
could, for a small scale, you could write something yourself if you have the skills,
Mm-hmm.
or someone else. So yeah, right. But that's I think something that I always keep an eye on it. And I'm also personally a fan of Rust because it just helps me with everything I always struggle. So I have a lot of runtime errors in the data engineering because it's just hard to test data because I don't know, I get them from third parties. I don't know how they look, right? So it's hard to test everything. But with Rust, it's easier because it's kind of type safe, and the compiler just checks a lot more than I would check myself. So it's just a generally more tested or battle tested solution. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the thing that you said before with the vector database, that's also one thing that I think should go, because now AI and LMMs, they use their own databases, right? And soon enough, the vector database are not fast enough for the data they read, and then they need another database, and then they need to optimize. They need to start creating indices, and they need to partition the vector database. And then I'm kind of thinking, okay, haven't we done that already all in data engineering? And then I'm thinking more that this should be like pushed back to more data engineering work and then integrate in the modern data stack, and then just use, because otherwise you model again another database, right? Which is but that's also somewhere I don't have enough experience, but that's something I'm following closely, that how can we not build the same again just for AI, right? To don't
Mm-hmm.
have these silos, so we build
Hmm.
different things in different silos.
Hmm. Makes sense. I like those comments on LinkedIn that I see sometimes where people are like making fun of um, like for example when I use vector stores like Chroma, Pinecone, and so on, and they're saying that it's most of the time it's overkill, and I could just use a NumPy array. I could just use that, and so I like the um, this kind of jokes. But yeah, it is really um, really interesting to put everything in perspective and to like, because like you mentioned, the problems that we're facing right now with vector databases, we've solved them. So like how are those going to integrate, or like, but I think like companies like Elasticsearch or Redis, they have their own like big vector stores, and they are like very implemented companies. So I'm sure they're working on this already. I'm
Mm.
sure Airbytes have things on this already. um, more
Yeah,
companies maybe.
I think Airbyte is now pushing the data. They're doing like a push at the end, and then they push it directly in these vector databases.
Mm,
But then who is doing the conversion, right, from the like your data mart or from your like from Airbyte to the vector? There is some kind of conversion, right? And I wouldn't like to have that somewhere inside the tool, right? And that must be an orchestrator, right? Because that kind of logic must be in where every other logic is. So this could be business logic or business relevant,
mm,
and then if you move that away somewhere, yeah, then we are there where I have started with, and yeah, that's
mm.
what I would like to avoid.
Or maybe you have your you have like cross data warehouses with vectors stored with like normal values, and then you start like you have pre-calculated the embeddings, and you just
I believe that normal database they will also have or already have like vector indices, so they are
mm,
also kind of building towards this, right? So hopefully we have databases that support both
mm,
in a way.
I'm
But yeah,
sure we will.
that's also where my knowledge stops. But I'm hoping we don't build everything again. That's my wish.
And if we do, I'm sure someone will fix this. Maybe
Yeah,
some people will start building it again, and someone will
yeah.
maybe
It's
yourself yourself in a few years
sometimes
you'll
also
listen again.
natural, yeah, that you just start building something fast that you can do your thing, and then later you kind of
Mm.
consolidate. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I still need to learn a lot about this. So, yeah, definitely we'll look into that. Very interesting. Coming back to your career and your experience, do you have like key lessons that you've learned on your journey as a writer and as a data engineer? Like maybe experience that you can share with us, lessons?
Uh, th- I don't know if that is too high level, but I learned that not having everything figured out is kind of the best thing, because I read this book from Paul Millard, Pathless Path, and that inspired me to write my own pathless path. And then I was kind of, actually, I would never have guessed that I will be a writer, because I was really bad at writing in my school. But then I noticed, okay, it's maybe my German. I don't like writing in German, but I kind of like writing in English because it's totally different, right? You can something specify or specifically say something in a few words, which in German is more like for poets that you can really write long sentences. So yeah, and also just be open-minded, and because also make slow steps, right? Because yeah, if you want to know everything from the beginning, that will never work. So follow your passion, learn one thing ahead, and is also sometimes you need to learn something to know that you like or don't like it. So you cannot know ahead of time that if you I want to dive into the modern data stack, and maybe in the beginning you don't know what it is, and then you learn, and then it's actually not mine, and then you pivot. There's so many things you can do within only data engineering or AI. So it's yeah, that's at least, and then search a kind of a project for that interests you, right? If you're into basketball or snowboarding or whatever, search a data set that interests you, and yeah, play around. I think that's what I do most of the time. I just play around, and then also use GitHub. So I think I didn't do that in the beginning, but as soon as I started to
Mhm.
push it to GitHub, only if it's only for myself, it's just yeah, other will see it. You can also build your portfolio if you will, but
Mhm. Mhm.
it also helps you to learn the tools and how to work with the yeah how we work, like work with software engineering patterns and so on. So that's the things I probably would have told myself when I would like start again.
Hmm. Awesome. That seems like a very good advices. Um, and well, speaking about writing, like how did you start writing? Why? And can you share a bit about your writing process, and maybe, and is it correlated to the open source passion? Like, could you do like a did open source lead you to write, or is it two different things? And you have a passion for open source, and you're passionate about writing.
In the beginning, it was separate, but nowadays it's just the same, right? Because my thinking happens while I write. If I don't write it in my second brain or in my note-taking app, then it's not really. I'm not thinking. So it's a. I have a very sophisticated way of writing. So, but it didn't start that way. So I always noted everything down in my OneNote. So I had 10 years worth of notes in OneNote, and but that was more like, okay, if I was in school, then I wrote down what I learned. But in Copenhagen, I just started writing also because I was familiar with the language English, and then I listened more podcasts, I read more books, and then I always heard people are reading, journaling, uh, and the people I most admired, they were writers, and I didn't know why, but somehow this triggered. I think it was more subconscious. It was not really that time. It wasn't really I want to write because they write, but now when I reflect back, it's I think that was a trigger that and also sometimes I'm a bit lost. I'm all over the place. So when I write, I can really organize my thoughts, and that's I also after I wrote, I really liked it. So I found kind of a passion, and people, if you share something for free, because when you write, you just publish and then you share it, and then people appreciate, right? Even if it's not the best, but they will appreciate because you give it for free. And that was always that was the main motivator for me. I also didn't write often, so I didn't force myself to write every week, or I just when I used it more as a fun for myself because I liked it, and to learn. So my day one of my principles is that I want to learn something every day, and by writing it down, I also like kind of no, also, don't forget it, and I can connect it then to other things I already learned, and then that way I learn even more, and then I can write about, and then you get this feedback loop where people read it and they give you feedback that you haven't thought about, so you can then integrate that again. And if you do that like over 2 3 years, you have so many insights you would never have had if you just write for yourself, or if you don't even write at all, right? Then because the more I also learned that our brain or my brain is not made for remembering. So it's like, it's so sad when I read a book or if I have an insight and then it just gets lost. So it's nowadays, that's why I call it the second brain, because it's like even if I go to the doctor and he tells me something, I write it in my second brain, which is just a note app. But because next time I go to the doctor, I don't even know what he told me, right? But then I know it better than him, and it's also okay because it's my health, right? So it's like, but this is like for everything. For data engineering, I do that for my family, for my kids. So whenever I need to do anything, I just write it down. But then the magic happens with Obsidian that you can kind of connect them. And then sometimes I read something, I put it in, and then I just leave it there for 5 years. And then 5 years later, I find this note, and then this inspires me to write something completely different would never have come up with just on the spot, right? So
Right.
it's really magical. It's almost hard to explain, but that's actually way later because first I just started writing, but now I also write in that the connected way, which I think my writing just gets better because I have way more insights than if I would just start from a blank page, because I never start actually from blank. I have a wealth of information. My second brain is full, so I could write about maybe 20, 30, 40 different things right now because I have so many things, right? And yeah, and then also the book came up, and that was then just I always had the idea to write a book, but I never knew when. And then my former boss told, you can do that next year. And then I was kind of overwhelmed, but then I said, oh, okay, let's try. And that was then the start of the writing more organized. So my idea is to now put all my 20 years of experience in a book that, but much more organized, right? Not in single. Some of them I already wrote as a single blog post, but now I would like to do it a bit more combined.
Amazing. I'm going to ask you about the second brain right away. I'd like to ask you on the book. So, what can people learn in the book? Like, so of course you're writing about data engineering, but do you have some insights on what you're sharing there, and like what can people expect reading it?
Yeah, as I said before, the starting point was that I always heard new terms on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and whatever, and then I thought if I dig deeper, it was actually something that was already existing since 10 years, and that was the starting point for the book. So I call it repeated terms, which is not so sexy, but then my former boss told me about this convergent evolution term, and that really captivated me. And this is I don't know, have you heard of convergent evolution before?
No, I haven't.
Okay, me neither. So it was like, but the explanation of it is like a bird and a bee, they both fly, but the bee has a skeleton and the bird has a feather. So they have totally different evolutions. They have the same goal. They can both fly, but they've gone through different times. I don't know the evolution when but they were not simultaneously. And that's the key point of my book. So I'm now, the convergent evolution is like a materialized view, and then I search like okay, DBT, and then I find this terms within data engineering, and then I compare them, find patterns, and see, because they have been through different evolution as well, right? And then I will see if they both have the same pattern, like flying. And then based on that, I would like to have like best practices, which would then be the design pattern. So my book is about data engineering design patterns. And I haven't figured them out yet all. I have some ideas, but the goal is also through the writing that I can explore them. And that's also what excites me, because I don't know them all yet. But while writing, sometimes I find a new one. And it's so, that's really what makes me happy to write, because yeah, I'm also doing it a bit different way. I will probably publish in 1 or 2 months, and it's like an unfinished book as a web version, everything for free, which then slowly evolved. I also hope to get a lot of feedback, and especially terms that I haven't thought of, and then that I can integrate them, and yeah, and then maybe 1 year ahead, or I might print a physical book, but yeah, you never know. I don't know yet if that's the plan, but yeah, I just start one by one, and yeah, the second brain essentially is the feel or the fuel, because I have there many things I already journaled about, and things that I thought is like similar, or patterns I explored. So yeah, that's helping me to write the book.
That's impressive. And you might like, because it feels like compounding effect. It feels
Hmm.
like you're writing this book right now. It's not like 20 years of experience. It's 20 years, but what the work that you're doing and the research plus the second brain that allows you to, it's like 40 years or 60 years because like
Yeah.
it just gives so much compounding effect just to be able to come back to all those concepts and having all those notes and being able to dive deeper because you're in the process of writing this book.
Mhm.
This is very impressive.
Yeah.
Where can people read it? So it's open source. Where can people look at it and give feedbacks and so on?
It's already the domain is already there, so it's DEDP for Data Engineering Design Patterns .online, or you can also go data engineering design patterns.com. It's a bit long, that's why I took also a short one.
Mm,
DEDP.online,
awesome.
which is but it's for now it's empty, but it's already like a intro and so on is there. But
Mm.
very soon it will be much more there. Yeah.
Awesome. So you heard it. If you want to check it out, it's there, and you'll have all the secrets to data engineering open sourced. So I'd like to ask you about the second brain. We've discussed second brain. We've heard you share about the second brain, your second brain at some times in this episode. So, like, what is it? I mean, I think we kind of have an idea of what's the second brain, and I think like many people are talking about how powerful it is and like how crazy it can help productivity and so on. So, can you share about the concept behind it and like what tool do you use? How does it work, and like how does it serve you on a daily basis?
Mhm. In a very simple term, it's just a note-taking app. But the difference, in my opinion, is that you have one app that you store everything. Because what happened to me before is when, if I had some insights, I put it in Google Keep, or I put it in OneNote, or should I put it email myself, or so I didn't had really a place where I was sure I will see it later again. So the first thing, in my opinion, is you need to have a tool or a place. It could also be like paper, right? If you have that always with you, you could. But that was the first thing, and I kind of like Second Brain, or the name, because it's not only about work or about what you do, but it's also in life, right? So if you have as I said before, if you do something personally, or also what I learned through that, it's also much in life. It's just our life is connected, right? You cannot be here on work and here on life, and they're completely different. So there, most of the thoughts you have in personal sometimes also connect to the like the work life
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
the sports life, or how many lives you have, and that's that's then a bit more special for the tool you use. I use now Obsidian, which is kind of the VS Code for notes. And instead of having folders, you use more like connected notes. So the way I use it, I have atomic notes. So whenever I have an idea, instead of putting it somewhere in a folder, I find it, I just make sure the title is something I will search later on. And then I directly connect it to something I know. So if I learn, I think in the way of AI, there's now RRG racks. I didn't know what it is, so I just put it in, and then I connected it to something I knew, and then I already knew half of the thing, right? Or sometimes I write, okay, this term is the same as this, so I already know 80% without even haven't heard of that term before. So
Hmm.
that's then the magic of that, but also the finding, because sometimes if I might search this podcast now with and I have some notes, I might remind your name, but I don't find what was the name of the note. So I just go on your name, and then from there I have a backlink to the notes. So and that's actually how our brain works. So it's like connected. So I don't need to. I find my things very easy. I very rarely use folders. I just always search, and because it's locally, Obsidian is kind of local markdown files, and then it's so fast because it cannot get fast. It's just text, right?
Hmm.
And also, one thing I like is Markdown, so it's also future proof. You don't put it somewhere in a tool that you don't get it. I had it in OneNote, So I was burned there, or I felt the pain because it was so hard to get it out. I had to export it as HTML, and then I had
Mm-hmm.
to kind of convert it to Markdown, and that was like a lot of scripting and Python
Mm-hmm.
coding, and it was very hard. And at the end, it was still not perfect, right? Because it's just a
Mm-hmm.
format that cannot be converted easily.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's. But on top of that, I also use like Vim Motions, which is I use everywhere for writing. So that's I use that in, in coding and in writing. So in case you haven't heard of it, it's like more instead of using Shift Control N to mark everything to the end, you have all the shortcuts like on the keyboard, and that just makes you a very fast writer or a coder.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's a steep learning curve, but it's if you work 8 hours a day, I think it's really worth like exploring it. If you like, it can also be you don't like it, but for me, when I learned that, it blew my mind because that's what I was searching for, but I didn't know it existed. So
So you said Vim Notions, Vim Motions, pardon.
Vim Motions, genau. It's there's this editor called Vim, which is quite ancient, and yeah, but you don't need to use that, but you should use the motions or how you move.
Mm-hmm.
And the the cool thing is when you start it up, it will not write. It's just all shortcuts, so you need to press I, and then it's the same as every editor, but the default is like a normal mode, and it's actually all short. So every key on your keyboard is a shortcut instead of writing. So that's a bit
Mm-hmm.
scary in the beginning,
You're
but
like, all right, what do I do now?
genau, and then you need to restart your computer because you cannot edit anymore. So that's the meme about that. But it's really yeah. There's also a plugin for every editor. Even Gmail has the shortcuts of Vim. Like if you want to go down, it's like J. If you want to go up, it's K. So it's all the tools or the. I think Superhuman is one of the best email clients. You pay like $30 a month, so it's really expensive. But what they do is just having very fast shortcuts, which are
Mm-hmm.
inspired by Vim again. So it's
Mm-hmm.
if you learn the Vim key bindings, you can be fast almost in every tool. And it's not really about fast, it's also about the mental overhead. So
Mm-hmm.
when I think, I don't need to think, oh, I need now to go to the end, and then I can really write in the speed of thought. And of course, the more I practice, the more I use it, the faster I get, which in
Mm-hmm.
other terminals, you're just at some point you're at a you cannot get faster, right? Because you don't have
Right.
any shortcuts anymore to
Yeah, you're
jump
like,
in the
just,
middle.
yeah, yeah. And you said it's for code too, like to write code, you use it too.
Yes, there's a newer version called NeoVim, and yeah, first I started with Visual Studio Code, and then I just added the plugin Vim, and at some point I went full NeoVim, and yeah, I use
So
it there
now
as
no
well.
more VS Code,
No more VS Code.
just directly. Wow.
Yeah, sometimes the only thing I didn't figure out yet, but probably could, is when I need to replace in a whole folder. I like to see it before, and then I use sometimes Visual Studio Code, but
Mm.
it's all very rare I use that. But
Mm-hmm.
most of the time
Mm-hmm.
it's just Vim. Yeah.
Makes sense. Very impressive. I've heard that superhuman is more like a flex in like successful entrepreneurs. Like you have this scent from superhuman, and like I've heard some jokes around that, but I didn't know it came from this like Vim thing where
That's my interpretation. I don't know if they had the same, but when I had I could use it at Airbyte, and then yeah, for me it was natural. I didn't had I used like 1 minute, and then I knew everything because the shortcuts were one to one like Vim. But of course, the
yeah.
implementation, I think they also have like the responsive. They have a super fast responsive time, and
Mm,
that's their key, right? So that of course they need to implement that as a web app.
mm.
But I think the way it works and also the search and everything is like key. The shortcuts are probably stolen, no, or copied from Vim, yeah,
Huh.
which is a good thing, I think.
Awesome. Amazing. So we're running a bit out of time, but I have some questions that I wanted to ask you. It is not that related, but kind of. So you mentioned before that you're a pretty busy person. You're doing many things. Your goal is to be full-time independent author, which is awesome. You have also your family and so on. So if I'm not mistaken, you you're a minimalist and stoicist also, or at least you are inspired by those philosophies and uh, thinking currents. Would you
Mhm.
like to share a bit further on this and how it impacts your day to day, and how you see your journey, either career or as a human being?
I think the Stoicism was something I explored through when I was living abroad, right? Because I had a lot of time. I didn't have many friends because I was in a new country. So I started learning or listening more books. And then I think Tim Ferriss also, I have it from him. So he had a lot of guests who talk about it. And then I just started the 365 daily habits or stoic habits. I'm blanking on the name, but something like that. And
Hmm.
then it's
What does that
basically,
look like?
hmm?
What does that look like?
It's from Ryan Holiday, and it's like you have like a text or something for every day. So it has 365 for every day. You can read one, and yeah. So there, I it really spoke to me because it's kind of the biggest thing that I learned from there is that you cannot control, or that you shouldn't be mad about things you cannot control. Right? If it's bad weather, you shouldn't be sad the whole day just because it rains, because you cannot change it anyway. And
Yeah.
just this kind of philosophies really help me also as a human being, and just at work and everywhere, right? I think I got more calmer. And it's also a practice, so it's kind of a even called meditation, I think, because you kind of meditate while you're reading. You kind of reading it every day, and then you train it, you meditate, and it gets more ingrained into you, and you just do it
Hmm.
out of habit.
Hmm.
uh, some say it's also a bit stoics are a bit dead people, right? Because it's kind they're so they don't celebrate the highs and the lows, because if you celebrate the highs so much, then you also need to be very sad when you have lows. So
Mm.
they say it's more like just be happy in every moment, right now in the present. So that's
Hmm.
one thing I take from, or I really took from there, and helped me kind of as a human being. And close to that is also the minimalism. Is more, I don't apply it that strong, but I try to apply it to work and writing. So I stripped out every word, every tag, everything I don't need, just to
Hmm.
be more succinct. It's also something I learned from Derek Sivers. He's like an entrepreneur who writes a lot of good stuff, which I really admire. And besides that, he also have like hell no, hell yeah or no. So say no. That's also one thing I apply a lot to my thing. I say no to almost all things except if I'm really excited about, and that gives me a lot of time, because I say no to most of the thing. And then when I say yes, I'm quite excited to do it. And also usually you get a better opportunity instead of if you just take the first one, right? So and with this in mind, and also with stripping away everything it's not needed, you also add more values to the reader in my in my writings. But also with coding, if you have less code, you less maintenance, less but also in life I try to value whenever I buy something, do I really need this, or can I sell? I try to sell my motorbike that I can buy a race bike, but now I bought the bike already, but the motorbike is still on sale. So I still trying to sell, but yeah. So but just having that in mind, so not the yeah. I also have kids and family, so I don't uh, we can don't have everything, but also be mindful. And I think minimalism is a good thing. I don't think you need to have only one spoon and one fork and whatever. But if you just have the concept in mind, or at least that's what I like to do with everything I do, then it helps me also to focus on the most important things.
Hmm. That's awesome. I really like all these kind of ways of thinking that improves your day to day, and I really like this idea of your your mental discipline is what allows you to be more present and more happy on a daily basis. And when I say happy, I mean with a calmer mind and more attentive to little things, and having more fun in general because I'm more present in a way.
Mm-hmm, totally.
And so I love this, and I love those insights. Awesome. we've done many topics on these episodes. I'm super curious to know um, what everyone who is listening think about all these topics, the value added, if they've checked your book. So let us know. I have three more questions of value. First of all, quickly, the languages in data engineer, and right now, from your perspective, you said Rust, Python, SQL. PySpark, I mean Spark, we could put Scala or Spark. Do you have more that comes in mind?
Um, I tried. Yeah, I just played around with Julia and some exotic languages, but more for fun, just to get
Mm-hmm.
some inspiration. And also, what is the name? Lisp language. What is the very?
Oh,
It's like a functional programming, and then
is it Mojo? No,
no, it's
no, it's
never mind. But it's like actually helped me to think in pipelines, because this list function was everything was almost like pipelines, and
yeah.
it was like an orchestrator, but it was a language. So yeah, that one.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, I think SQL is still the biggest one when you work in data, and then of course Python is the language of data engineering, and Rust is yeah, is coming up. But yeah, in my opinion, it will be used heavily.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, some say Python, but for sure Python will stay forever, I
Mm-hmm.
believe. But
Awesome.
yeah.
So three little questions that I have in the end. First is trying to provide the most value to everyone listening, myself included. What tips or lessons you could share for anyone who is either advanced or just getting started in the field of data engineering? Like, do you have you shared some advice before, but do you have more? Do you have tips?
Mm, I think stay curious, try things out. Also, sometimes get a job that doesn't pay as good, but just that you can learn. Like yes, also you just need to get started, right? Because sometimes yes, saying what you need to do is quite easy, but starting is the hard part. But sometimes I also feel a bit bad or sad for or bad for people, because they think they need to know all of these things. But I have now worked in BI first, and then data engineering just got started, right? So I was just there when it started, and it's kind of similar to BI. So it's a bit unfair then to expect the same knowledge from others, right? So I would be kind of be patient, and yeah, also like find a mentor or someone who can. Or for me, I always search people who inspire me, and then I try to do the same. So I also like Max Boschmi, who was like starting Airflow and Superset. He was a super writer. He kind of basically wrote the first data engineering principles, and I just got so much inspired by him that I also tried to kind of write about BI, and try to write principles. And I think if you have people you admire, then you can also just imitate them. You don't need to tell them, but you can just try to imitate. Nobody will know. And yeah, it's also easier than just figuring out everything yourself. You just try to do similar things. And yes, it's also easy to say, but start sharing, because sharing for sure the first my first blogs were very bad, and still when I read my blogs I think so many for so many grammatical errors, and there is things wrongs. And but sometimes it's also good to share, and then like optimize or rework. Or but yeah, just don't be shy to not share. Or also one advice, which is maybe one of the biggest: start your own blog, or at least have your own domain. Because if you use LinkedIn or Medium or Substack, I'm a big proponent of having your personal website, because first of all you have your own style, and people get to know you just by going on your website. But second, you you also don't lose your work, right? Because my work is also quite good, because I compound it over time, as you said before. And this is when you have a different, if you need to change every 5 years the platform, you always lose. Of course you can sometimes export it, but it doesn't work every time easy. But if you have your own domain, and then you can still share on the other platform, but do a canonical link to your own domain, so that will be ranked in Google. But I think that is one of my biggest advantage as well, that I just had from very early on. I had my website, and you don't need to be a web developer or anything like this, but I also get passionate about the website, so that's also one thing I like. So that's maybe advantage for me as well. But there's also you can also have a Substack and just register your domain, right? So it's still yours, and you don't lose when you switch. You still have the same domain or URL, but you don't lose that as well. And yeah, at least when you're into writing. But in any case, writing is good for everyone, I believe, even if nobody reads, if it's just for you. And yeah, that's why also I like to journal, and for myself only. And yeah, please start writing. We need more writers.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I believe that this is like, I really like this comparison. I mean, you said so many things that it gives me a lot of ideas, but I really like this comparison of like, can I do like simple math addition in my head? Yes. Can I do complex calculus like multiplication and divisions with like digits and so on? Well, at some point it can get complicated, but on paper I can. And so if I do the same thing with my thoughts, like the same approach, I mean, my thoughts will have the same limitations as me calculating in my head. And so if I put them down, I have way better understanding of the bigger picture, and I can do better calculations with thinking than what I'm doing just on top of my head.
And one huge advantage as well, because if you write it down, if somebody disturb you, or if you need to go somewhere else, I can now much easier context switch also with my kid when she interrupts me or so, because I have written it down. And also the peace of mind, because you have written it down, you don't always need to think about, right? It's like the getting things done thing, that you need to write it down, so it doesn't bother your brain. So you don't need, sometimes you are awake in bed and always thinking about one thing, but if you just write it down but you need to have a place, but if you have that place and write it down, it kind of, your mind calms down, and you can also have a calmer life just by, it sounds ridiculous, but just by writing it down. And so basically you're tricking your brain. You're just writing it down. Maybe you don't find it anymore, but at least your brain is calm because it knows it's saved.
Yeah, totally. I've heard like people who have like multiple journal, and one journal is just like for before going to bed, just for the next day. And what I like to do is like writing my 5 priorities of next days when I finish working, because I know exactly what I need to do tomorrow. And so if I put it right now down, then maybe I'll remember something that I forgot on that moment, but I just need to add it to this piece of paper that I have, and I know where it is. And I know that tomorrow when I will like reset my brain, I'll be like, all right, what was on my to do? And I just.
You also save yourself brain power, because you only have limited amount of brain power. And if you use half of it just to remember what you did yesterday and where have you been, and if you have that done the day before, when it's like just there anyway, then you also saved a lot of brain power. Yeah, and that's basically what the second brain is, because whenever if I read, I write it directly down, right? It doesn't take me much more time because I'm used to it, and but it saves me so much time down the road, right? So it's a little bit similar. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for all this advice. Where can people know more about you? So you mentioned your domain. It will be in the description. People can look at the book. You mentioned your LinkedIn, where people can know more about you. You have a newsletter, if I'm not mistaken. Like, do you have more things to share with people where they can follow you or reach out and so on?
It's everything on my website. So it's ssp.sh. So it's there is everything. That's like the newsletter and all my socials, but I try to put everything there. There's also my second brain. My book will be linked there, obviously, and yeah, everything.
Awesome.
I just changed the domain so it's shorter, so hopefully people can remember
Okay.
better.
I'm sure. Awesome. And last question, do you have one message for the Let's Talk AI community, anyone who's listening until the end? By the way, thank you for supporting the podcast. This is a 51 episode, and so a big milestone on my range, of course. You
Yeah,
look at the Lex Freeman.
congratulations.
Thank
That's
you. You look at the Lex Freeman podcast, he's like over 400 or something. But like, maybe
I
one
think
tips
it's
is not comparing to others and like just comparing to me a month or a year ago. Those are like some maybe basic, like basic self-development things, and I know like some people are like, but I really believe in those things, and I believe that the key is like implementing things and thoughts. Maybe you can react on that. But so super happy about that, and I want to thank you again for coming on the show. And do you have a message to like summarize? It can be professionally, data engineering, your website, and so on. Any message?
Mm, yeah, thank you for having me, and I really like your podcast and the way you do it. Like, really, I like deep conversation. That's also why I like to talk to you because I really have the time. And yeah, I think maybe one last message is read the book "Thinking Fast and Slow" from Daniel Kahneman. I think because it's, as you said, sometimes you get overwhelmed, but if you just do things slowly, right? It's also going into the thing of slow productivity. So instead of trying to do everything, I need to have now 200 episodes, and then when you have 200, you need 500, and just do it slow but with passion. That's always my mantra, and I think yeah, the yeah the quality sometimes is also better for me when I spend more time on something, but I don't have the quantity so often. So, but yeah, it doesn't work for everyone, and everyone is different. But I like to be slow and think about and think through and yeah, try to get or push as much value as I can by sharing. And I like to not share too often, but more deep. Yeah, that's maybe also a message that people can try to do. So for that, you can also read the Carl Newport. I think that's also a good book, like Slow Productivity, which comes out soon. And yeah, read books. Maybe that's another thing because I learned so much just by reading books, or I don't read them, but I listen to them. So Audible is my friend. Yeah, I think books sometimes are also more calm. So when you read news online, it's like so chaos and every hour, every minute. If you just read books, they are distilled over years, and the older, usually the better they are. And yeah, don't get too overwhelmed.
Awesome. Amazing. Well, thanks for your kind words first, and thanks for those amazing messages. I had an amazing time, and I wish you
You too.
to have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you so much, Thomas.